Hey, how's it going? You are tuned into episode number 1, the pilot episode, MisterJoshW podcast. We're here live from the Space Coast podcast studios, sunny Florida. Let's just jump right in. You're probably wondering to yourself, who are you? Why are you doing this? What's the point? There's about 1 million podcasts, so why the fuck would we listen to you? Cursing's allowed, right? Yeah. Why the fuck would we listen to you?
Yeah, no problem.
All right, great. And all props to Jesse, who runs this whole operation, and a class act, and a great operation. And I'm new to this, so Space Coast Podcast, check them out as well on Facebook, and go like them, and go like me, MisterJoshW Podcast, and I'm on Instagram. And I'm on YouTube, and let's jump in here. This is not going to be the typical format of this show. So this introductory episode pilot is going to really just give you a background on who I am and why I'm doing this, or why I chose to. So let's start by saying I am pretty much a lifetime Florida resident, 44 years old. Interesting life. So let's start at the beginning. Who am I? Why are my opinions going to be what they are when you see them, hear them, come across them, hate me for them, write me terrible emails, or send me the carcass of a raccoon or whatever you think you want to do to piss me off or upset me. I saw it all in talk radio with Eric Bogosian. Highly recommend the movie. Bobby Champlain. I do a lot of movie references, and which I guess I remember too many lines from all these movies. So you'll hear me randomly break into that, and people usually hate it when I do that, and they usually don't get the movies that I'm referencing either. So let's start at the beginning. My mommy and daddy lived in Brooklyn, New York, and they both worked for a very well-established, well-known custom made to order suits in Manhattan, mainly catering to a gay clientele, and $1,000 suits in the 70s, as the story was told to me. And they had 2 locations, and this gentleman, Jewish fella, was going to promise my mom that she was going to eventually own this place. He was going to let her buy it out when he retired. And he was an old man. He was planning on retiring pretty soon. 2 blocks from Bloomingdale's, I think, in Manhattan. So like in the Garment District, a real trendy, expensive area. Anyways, my father decided, and this is all before I was born, that he didn't really want to do it anymore, and he went into the whole Woodstock hippie shit, and that became his life, and he wasn't down with the fashion business anymore, and my mother was, and she was very happy doing what she was doing. And fast forward, one day she comes home and she sees a big eviction notice on the door, and it's like, holy shit, how does this happen? Well, pre-dad wasn't paying the bills, so they had nowhere to live. And thus, that started the wonderful chapter of how that was going to go. And so her parents had already retired to Hollywood, Florida. And she had nowhere to go. So like anybody, you go and back and live with mom and dad. And thus, that's how Florida came into everybody's life. They had already retired down there. And my father decided he wanted to follow her down. And she allowed that. And they got back together again and eventually had me. And born in Hollywood, Florida, and my whole Florida ties, my entire family being. Some people say, "Oh, you have a New York accent. You're not even from New York," and assume it's fake. And there's nothing fake, and you'll see that as you listen and to the things that I say. And I don't even really know how to be fake if I really tried. So probably to my own detriment. But that being said, they have me. And boy, they didn't get off to a good start. So things were a little rocky. And, someone might be saying, why are you sharing all this? And what is it? What good does it do you? Whatever. This is to give you a background on why I'm so fucking warped. And I am. I just do a very good job of controlling it. But these are going to be topics we're going to talk about. I want people to share, what makes them who they are. That's it's because it is very important. Who you think you are started at a very, very young age. What you were exposed to, or what you maybe weren't exposed to. I can tell you now, if your parents didn't read to you when you were a baby, you probably can't fucking read well. And you probably don't like to read, and you probably can't spell well, and your grammar probably sucks. And there's an exception to the rule, of course, but more than likely, you're probably bad at that. And that's your parents' fault, so blame them. So that being said, my mom and dad had a very tumultuous beginning, and it was violent, and he loved Southern comfort. For a Jewish guy from Brooklyn, he sure loved redneck swill. Well, I guess it's not swill, but Southern comfort, it's Southern comfort. Go make sense of that. So that was his thing. And he would get pretty crazy on that, pretty violent. So at 5 years old, my mother decided we can't do this anymore. Something's got to give. And so they split. And she went and saved herself. And I'm going to have all sorts of stories and fun little anecdotes of how that went and what I was exposed to at a young age with mom and hanging out at the bar and, and playing that sit-down Pac-Man game where you sit down and you got a stack of quarters and Foreigner's Urgent is playing in the background. It's like etched in my brain forever. And they're just, her and her girlfriend or whatever trying to find some guy. Who knows what was going on, Isn't that? I was so knee-deep into the Pac-Man, which made it easier for her. What a great babysitter, Inky, Blinky, and Clyde. I think those are their names, the ghosts. And so I did. That's how that went. And very interesting living with my father for 3 years. It's very vivid. 5 through 8, first, second, and third grade was very vivid and very interesting and what I was exposed to. And again, we'll go into that down the road. Fast forward, my mom, she meets this Jewish guy, Joel. And Joel is a food distributor, salesman, and he's well-to-do, and she was happy, and things were great. So she plucks me out from the bad guy, and I go and live with Joel and my mother, and things were much better. And this is, again, in South Florida, West Broward area, Fort Lauderdale area. And things were good until, this was when my mother became very career-driven. And for someone who was just a high school graduate, I mean, God bless her, this was the best job she ever had. And she worked for a health plan, a PPO HMO company that was very big in the 80s, was bubbling up as a major business as everybody needed benefits. And we were starting to realize how unhealthy we were and all the things that was going on in America in the 80s and the greed and all that shit. And so she did that for a long time. So I didn't have too much of a relationship with her in that regard. And Joel really had nothing to do with me. He was so involved in his life. But I was also a young man, and you're with your friends and all that shit. And you don't really care as much. But and then my father was drinking himself into an oblivion in a whole another world, another realm, which I would visit him and get to experience that. And I got to tell you, there's nothing better than that weekend visit with Dad while he's passed out drunk. That's very, very fun. But he did buy me Little Caesars. So there's always that's a silver lining. My mother's company, and this is the shame of a lot of this is where things kind of went downhill for her. Also, is her company got bought out by Blue Cross Blue Shield, and this was like my first experience with when people talk about outsourcing and downsizing and all this, and the big fish swallowing the little fish. We were a direct result of that. And I don't think my mother ever bounced back from that. They fired everybody at the place that she worked at, and she was at that point she was just ass out, and it really had an effect on her, and it apparently affected her marriage and all that, and things weren't going as well. And then one day, I think it was after 9th grade, and I was in New York visiting for the summer, visiting my alcoholic father and that family, and my mother tells me, this is a great surprise. Get ready, everybody. She says, "Hey, I'm divorcing Joel, and we now live in an apartment in so-and-so and so-where, and your whole life is changing over in your room and all that stuff and all that. And I took as much as I could from your room, but we live in a whole nother place. You have another life when you get back from vacation." That's fucking awesome. That's great news, by the way. That's like getting punched in the gut and the balls. And if anyone's ever had that done, it sucks. I usually pay somebody to do that to me, but I'm kidding. I have never done that. But that was really tough. So that was the next transition, you know. And so I get to live with mom, and then I realized, wow, mom's kind of crazy. And I had already experienced that, but after all this happened, like, mom's not really doing anything anymore. She's in bed all the time, and there's no real motivation. And this was now my introduction to food stamps and introduction to really poor living in high school. And I got to tell you, I did as good as I could of faking all that and trying to deal with that. And that was difficult. I was a really, really good student. I'm leaving out some good things. But at that point, I was a truant by 12th grade. And I stopped going to school, and I had a gang of like 3 or 4 of us, and we would go and smoke pot and do stupid shit, and just wasn't going to school. We would all meet at school and congregate. Let me tell you, the security at Western High, impeccable, really. We would leave every day. Good job, guys. And so we would leave, and we would go do our thing. And ironically enough, that was the only time I ever failed a class was my senior year. I did not get to walk the stage, which is, you know, pretty shitty, boo-hoo. But I also was never there to buy a cap and gown, so probably wasn't going to do it anyways. And I remember I failed a half a credit of a required course. I had never failed anything. I never even got a D in my whole life. C's were devastating. So I screwed up in high school. And I don't know if this is an endorsement or a reverse endorsement. So if you went to this school, forgive me for saying this, but I really had no intention on going to college at that point. I had no help and no guidance, and nobody was going to really show. And I certainly was going to be caught in the student loan thing. Like we didn't have a penny to put toward this shit. So everything I was going to do, I'd have to borrow. And I wasn't looking forward to doing that. I don't think I really took it seriously. But my mother insisted from her bed that I apply to 3 schools. So I did. I applied to University of Florida in Gainesville. I applied to Florida State in Tallahassee. And I applied to University of South Florida in Tampa. So I was going to stay in the state. 2 of those schools turned me down, as they should. I never went to 12th grade. And I again, if you went to this school, I'm sorry. But for some fucking reason, University of South Florida accepted me. And I couldn't, it was almost like I really didn't want to get accepted. The whole point, I wasn't going. So to get that acceptance letter was really bizarre, and I had no intention of going. But it also made me think, if this school is taking me, I don't think I want to go here. And so I would say anybody that's a South Florida Bull, don't break your arm patting yourself on the back, okay? Because they took a truant. So, you know, that's that. So moving along, the high school thing comes to an end, and then real life begins. And I bounce back and forth after high school, and I get a job. I think it was American Express. It was a great job, and I screwed that up. And there's some stories to that. And I just did some regular stuff. And I've had some interesting jobs in my life. Telemarketing most of my life. Never really worked in fast food. I worked at Taco Bell for a day. I had never eaten there my whole life. And I go and get a job at Taco Bell. And the manager, he winds up hiring me and putting me to work in street clothes. He just leaves. And I remember I had to do the food prep at drive time. And that's hard. And Taco Bell, in case you don't know, there's about like 10 different size fucking shells there. So like if you don't know what you're doing, the shells are like barely any different size of each other. Very confusing. And I remember the manager girl, the assistant manager, yelling at me when I broke the taco shell, getting very mad because I broke the shell. And I never went back. I finished my shift, and that was that. So I did a lot of telemarketing and different jobs. One of my most interesting jobs while living in New York, in that time after high school, I bounced back between Brooklyn, New York, and South Florida for a couple, maybe 3 or 4 years. I was a Christmas tree night watchman. So you ask yourself, well, what is that, and how do I get into that field? You can't. It's very tough, very hard to get into. So I actually worked at a nursery that my father worked at, and a high school buddy of his owned, and it was in a rough neighborhood. And that rough neighborhood was the kind of neighborhood where folks steal Christmas trees from nurseries and throw them over the fence, and then they go sell them in the projects for pennies on the dollar. So if you know anything about Christmas trees, you know, it's a fucking $80 Fraser fir. You can't just have that hop over a fence. I mean, that's a lot of money. And it gets sold in the hood for $25. And so they needed somebody there. So I had like a rifle and a machete, and I had to stay up all night. And I would actually sell Christmas trees before even doing my shift because it was overnight. And I got to tell you, you really learn a lot about people by how they choose their Christmas tree. I never knew in my whole life how serious some people took it. And I would watch the fights between the people and the bald spot in the tree and them getting mad it doesn't smell enough, and the guy taking the pine needles off of it and sticking them literally up his nostril to see how piney it was. I mean, people are fucked up. They really are. There's something so wrong. These trees would be on pins, so on a pallet. So like, when they're leaning against the fence or doing their thing, whatever, okay, that's not the one they want to see. They want to see the one that's already displayed. Well, you got to take it off and spin it around for them. You'd have people want you to take 10 trees off these things. You got to pull it off. You got to be strong. Pull it off the pin and all this shit, whatever. By 10 trees, you don't want to do it anymore. It's just like, they're not going to even buy one. All right, well, so anyways, very odd job. And then another job I had in New York, which was really, really fun. And I'll tell two funny anecdotes about that. I worked at Kim's Underground Video in Manhattan on Bleecker Street. It was right in Greenwich Village. And Kim's Underground was like the anti-Blockbuster. This was the coolest fucking place. That'll just do that for that. Kim's had all these foreign films and all the martial arts and everything you could think of that Blockbuster just didn't have. And we had a lot of celebrities. I remember when I met Drew Barrymore, she's about the size of my leg. Very, very tiny and petite, and a real sweetheart. And I just remember meeting her, and I had met Spike Lee, and there's other people that would come in there, New York folks. So that was really cool. And we just had all the coolest movies. So I became a film geek, and it was during the 90s indie film boom. So Quentin Tarantino and Kevin Smith Clerks and Reservoir Dogs and Jim Jarmusch and fucking Richard Linklater and who did Flirting with Disaster? David O. Russell. So if you know anything about movies or indie film, the 90s was the quintessential indie film time. So I wanted to be a director, and I learned some things about that. So I worked at this video store. And so two funny stories was most video stores back then, mom and pop allowed you to rent 6 videos at a time. And this guy comes in, and he's a pimp. And I can tell he's a pimp because he's dressed like a 70s style pimp, fur suit, fur coat and purple suit and shades and the hat and a fucking gator loafers and he had his bitches with him, of course, because every good pimp should have their bitches with them. And they come into the video store, and we had a porn section. So every mom and pop video store had a porn section. That's because porn made a lot of money, and especially in VHS days, everybody was renting them. It was the first time of privacy. Otherwise, you had to go to those movie theaters in the trench coat, and beat off in the back row, the real sicko Pee Wee Herman shit. And highly recommend that, by the way, for a nostalgic thing, like a throwback, to check out those theaters. So the VHS was big, and we also had a gay porn section. That'll lead to my next story. So we had straight and gay porn, and I remember this pimp. So he brings his 6 boxes and he puts them on the table, and I remember they were shopping around in there, and he was really looking at the boxes and choosing these things so carefully. You know what I mean? And I look at his 6 boxes, and I go to put them back to then ring up his others. He's returning. And the 6 he was bringing back were somebody else's porn. So this guy had 6 of our porn, 6 from another video store's porn, and wanted 6 more from us. He thought he was returning them. So I'm trying to realize these boxes are fatter and the number codes aren't matching up. And I have to say to him, regrettably, these are not our movies. And you just took I hate to tell you this, and you spent an hour choosing so carefully, like it was fucking Gone with the Wind, the porn that they were going to rent for wherever they were going to do this. And I told him, you can't rent these other 6 unless we get these back, and these aren't ours. Oh, my God. It was the end of the world. It was the first time that I really thought I was going to be pimp slapped in my life. And I don't even trick. So I wound up talking him down, and everything worked out. And I just said, hey, you got to take these back. But here's the news. I'm going to keep these aside for you. And when you come back, you bring your 6. We'll gladly change these out for you. And I wasn't there if he ever came back, whatever. So I don't ever know really what happened to him. But that was my pimp video story. Now, my second one is, and I'm pretty open, I guess. I'm pretty tolerant. Probably that's a better word, tolerant. And having lived in South Florida and in New York, pretty much the only 2 places I ever lived up until now, they're very liberal areas, and there's a lot going on. So there's no shortage of craziness of all sorts of stuff. But I also am being a straight male, a straight white cis Jewish male, whatever you want to classify me as, or the devil, white devil, that I thought I could go my whole life without really dealing with gay porn. And I have to say that I have to cross that off my bucket list now, and here's what happened. As I saw that I worked at this video store, I started noticing, but because we were on Bleecker Street and we were in Greenwich Village, that the gay porn got rented more than the straight porn, probably at a 4-to-1 clip. And when you work in a video store, you have to put the boxes away. So if you put 2 and 2 together, I'm always putting gay porn boxes away. And you're going to get curious because, it's the box. And I got to tell you, what I saw on those boxes, especially the German, Austrian shit, I'll never forget. And you got to remember, this is pre-internet. So anything you think you've seen now, whether you've seen a straight porno and you've seen some guy's ding-dong in someone's mouth, or you've come across just somehow, some way, you've seen a gay scene, whatever we've all seen something. We've all seen something wacky. I don't care who you are, what you say. You've watched 2 Girls, 1 Cup. You've seen it. By the way, shame on you. It's one of the fucking worst things I've ever seen in my life, ever. Never watched the whole thing. And I implore anybody who's not seen it, don't watch it. That's a whole separate thing. We can do a whole thing on that because that is one of the worst things I've ever. Have you seen that? Oh, my God. Let me take a moment. Anyways, but these gay pornos were hardcore, man. Hardcore. So that's my second story, is having worked at Kim's. And by the way, all these Kims have closed, and they, and you can Blockbuster or whatever, but this is way before Netflix and all that shit. But they were icons, and anybody who's been to New York City knows Kim's Underground because he had like 5 locations. Fucking one of my best jobs ever. And I remember when I worked there, I was a hipster before there were hipsters. The hipster thing started in Brooklyn. I was fucking 19, 20 years old, wearing the corduroys and the skull cap and hating everybody and sarcastic and film geek kind of shit and whatever. But it's funny because now with the man bun era, it's like cool and trendy. But the hipster thing before was never about a trend. You were the anti-hero. You're listening to like fucking Sonic Youth and you smelled. You know what I mean? Like it was just a whole different ball game, Luscious Jackson and all that shit. And we'll get into music too. Big music fan. Jesse's a big music fan, I've come to learn. He knows a large, if he knows who Mr. Bungle is, and you can Google Mr. Bungle, Mike Patton's side project. Nobody knows who that is, especially if you're younger for sure. But you got to really know alternative music to know that, and Faith No More, other than Epic, which was arguably one of their worst songs, probably of their whole catalog, but it was catchy and all that. And he's running around with the boxing gloves, just bizarre. And I love that guitarist with the glasses, with that frizzy hair. That dude, what do you mean? Like he reminded me kind of like of Mick Mars. Like he was like he had a minor stroke, almost kind of thing. He was just, there was almost no energy for such an energetic kind of band. And all love to Mick Mars, but Donald Trump would classify him as very low energy, very, very low energy compared to Vince Neil and Tommy Lee and these guys. Anyways, so moving forward. So I did that in New York, and then I met somebody on AOL, of all places. And when it first started, I mean, I had the dial up, the whole thing, and that's like music to my ears. And we met, and really the meeting was just boom, like that. And that was the meeting. And then from then on, it was always about talking on the phone and getting to know each other and visiting and whatever. And then I was given the opportunity, and there's plenty of great stories in between, and we'll talk about those on the MisterJoshW podcast, which you are listening to live right now. First episode, pilot episode. Woo! What a monumentous moment. Monumental moment? Monumentous? And we're doing this, by the way, live out of the Space Coast podcast studios in sunny Florida. And so I was, we met, we were in our little relationship, long distance thing, and it wasn't very long. And I was told, hey, why don't you come live with me? And my parents said it's okay, which that's fucking nuts. And then we'll move out, we save up money and move out as fast as we can. And that's what we did. And before we moved out, she got pregnant 3 months into the relationship. So, like my dad, my family used to call me Fertile Myrtle. I mean, 3 months, man. What a rapid chain of events. So I had a baby on the way, and shit got real. And as sad as this is to say, I went and I'm in the minority of in this modern day times of actually taking care of your kids. Wow, surprise! The guy actually stayed and took care of his kids. Yeah, that's a fucking shocker, isn't it? Amazing in these days and times. So I took care of my daughter, and we eventually got married, and it was a long time. And down that road, my father passed away of cancer. In that time when he did that in 2001. My father actually passed away of cancer, colon. Get yourself tested, folks. I know I have to do it. I'm scared. I have never had a colonoscopy, but I'm certainly willing to, I need to get one. But he passed away of colon cancer and no preventative and all that. And, boo-hoo, that all really sucks. And the shame of that. But he passed away of that and 55 years old. And I was, this is before. Well, I mean, he passed away when my daughter was, I think, maybe 3 years old. So, 2001, 10 days before 9/11. What? Strike that. It's 10 days. September 1st was 9/11? No, 9/11 on the 11th. Oh, my God. September 1st was 9/11. Yeah, good pot, man. Good shit. No, my father passed away on September 1st, 10 days before 9/11. So, they both kind of stand out to me. 9/11 inside job. Hashtag inside job. But, and we'll go into that another time, which, by the way, the 9/11 thing is really what set me on the road to conspiracies. I've always was open to these things, whatever. But after 9/11, if you ain't figured it out by then, I don't know what you're thinking. And I will school you. But, so he passed away. And then I raised my daughter, and here's where it's going to get good. I wind up in the strip club business through a friend of mine, and this friend of mine was he wasn't a friend. We became friends. And my mother, God bless her, wound up working for an attorney that her sister, after she was going through all of her depression, all her shit, her sister says, hey, her sister worked for this divorce attorney in South Florida. He says, my sister's kind of in a bad way. Do you think maybe you can let her answer the phones one day a week, get her out of the house? And he said, yeah, sure. And my mother, God bless her, she took that one day and turned it into 2 days and 3 days and 4 days. And then eventually was getting more and more work, then was handling all the bankruptcies that the law firm was taking on, and then became an integral part of the office and full-time employee and really became the right-hand man to this attorney, and which was really great for her because it really came from the bottom, literally bedridden and on food stamps and the whole shit. And so that's a really great story. And she had a picture of me, my football photo, and one of these gentlemen, this kind of Italian meatball kind of guy, sees the picture. He's a client. He's like, and he works at a strip club. He's a higher up, like a general manager or whatever. And he says, oh, is that your son? Yeah. Oh, she said, oh, you two would really get along. You should meet him. And he says, well, have him come down to the club. This is to my mother. Hey, have your son come down to the strip club. And where I can ply him with booze and he can bring pot. And that's what happened. And that changed my life forever. That was the beginning of, well, not the end, but it was definitely the beginning of a major chapter. And so I wound up eventually working at said club, and that club was called Porky's, and it's in Hialeah in Miami area. And if you're familiar with Hialeah, it's all Latin, where the signs and the billboards are in Latin, and a lot of gang activity and a lot of drugs and all that. And there's nice parts of Hialeah, and I put that in quotes of what nice is. But it can be a little rough. It's Miami, there's a lot going on over there. And, Little Haiti and Overtown and Liberty City and Allapattah. And if you know Miami, you know these areas, you don't want to get off on the wrong exit in Liberty City. I'm sorry, you don't. And so these were a lot of our clients. These were people that would come there. Anyways, so I spent a long time there, and I worked there in 2 different intervals. And then in the second interval was when I really had some power, and I have so many stories. And again, for another time, we're going to go into that. That'll be something that I'd like to do in the Stripper Chronicles. I'm going to discuss a lot of my life in that time, the stories, the anecdotes. We're going to bring in girls from that industry so people can get an understanding from their side. And because guys go to these places, I'm sorry to tell you, people and ladies and folks, people go to these places. And I'll go into why they go to these places, because there's a myriad of reasons, especially if you ever worked in daytime in them. Because like if you're in a strip club at 3 p.m, it's a whole fucking different animal. We need to have a sit down talk with you. So there's a lot of stories tied in with Porky's, and I formulated a great friendship with this gentleman, and I'll divulge who this gentleman is later on, because I think I have it here. So this right here, put it here for the camera, whatever, is a new time story about something that I lived through, and basically, we wound up in Panama. So fast forward, how did we get here? How am I at this podcast? So the time at Porky's came to an end. The owner passed away. The second owner, the original owner, Russian mobster, Ludwig Feinberg. Google Ludwig Feinberg, and he was the original owner. And he's also the subject matter of Operation Odessa on Showtime. And what he's famous for was being the middleman between the Russian military of people he knew that had surplus helicopters and a surplus nuclear submarine. These were no longer in operation. And he was a middleman to broker getting those the helicopters first, and then the submarine was the next chapter or challenge for a drug cartel. I believe the Cali cartel, if I'm not mistaken. This is before I was there. And then they finally pulled the chain on him before the submarine deal could go through. But this is all, again, Operation Odessa. This was on Showtime. It went to South by Southwest. Tiller Russell was the director, and Tiller Russell, I think they won an award even for this. So, and then it got bought by Showtime, and it's currently on Showtime On Demand right now. And once the Miami situation was over, we had already discovered Panama. Now, Panama is a very interesting country. Panama is a paradise, but it's also, and I hate to say this, but I think like all countries, there's a level of corruption. Surprise, United States has it too. But once money's really flowing in, people are different. That canal changes everything for that country. It is not like Honduras. It is not like El Salvador. There is a ton more money flowing through there. It's also where all the cocaine flows through. All the Colombian cocaine. See, here's Panama on the map. Here's Colombia on the map. You got to go through here to get all the coke over to where you got to get to. So it all goes through Panama. And it was interesting because I learned that cocaine was like pot, and pot was like cocaine over there. It was completely different. One was everywhere, and one was really hard to find. It was quite bizarre. So we had, I was this gentleman's right hand, and I helped him in everything he did in every aspect. I was his armchair psychologist. I was his best friend. I was his fucking legal advice. I mean, if he needed an armchair lawyer, I was looking everything up. I was his researcher. I mean, I pretty much did everything for this gentleman because he was like a father figure to me and all this stuff and all that. Now, while this is all going on, my mother also was suffering, also got cancer, like my father. And so kind of going through, she was starting to go through that as I was over there. So we go to Panama, and we're visiting at the end of the stint. The club got closed down. Let me just rewind back for 1 second. The club got closed down once the owner, and the owner of Porky's was Bill Seidel. After the Russian got in trouble, he was deported. He was no longer the owner anymore. So he's out of the picture. And the government takes over the club, and they held on to it for a little while, and then they turned the club over to the landlord. And that landlord happened to be Bill Seidel. And Bill Seidel was a major car magnate down in South Florida. And if you're familiar with South Florida at all, they had a jingle, and it was "Seidel's gonna save ya," and that'd be on the radio all the time, and it, something that would be beat into your heads. So this guy had tons of cash, and he wound up owning the club, and he made my buddy basically the face of the whole club. Bill Seidel was never there, so it was like that absentee ghost owner. And so it was cool. My best friend ran the whole fucking joint. So I kind of became the number 2 in that guard. So needless to say, like, there wasn't a lot of problems at work because my boss was my buddy. So that's a pretty cool setup. Besides being in a strip club, and it's definitely an interesting environment. There are harder jobs. I've done them. Remember Christmas Tree Night Watchman? Fucking sucked. And so we discover Panama through my buddy has a buddy that tells him this is the new frontier. So we wound up having a business. He had a wing joint bar and a coffee shop, and it was all going very, very well. And then one day, just like a story, and just like the movie that'll eventually be coming out is going to show you, that Russian guy shows up in Panama out of nowhere, and he finds my buddy in our wing joint, and I remember it. And he was pretty much so excited for the opportunity, and he basically told my buddy, "We should open up club. We should open up club Miami style right here in Panama. We should." Russian guy, it's my best Russian. "We should open up strip club right here. We'll make so much money, but Miami style, something different here. We have people already here. We can do this." And for some reason, my buddy was seduced by the idea. And that's what they did. They opened up a club with some help. And I was the DJ at that club with them. And the club was open for 3 months. It was nice, very luxurious. And we had the other club that the Russians owned. And then there was this one club in between us. It wasn't even really a club, more of a massage parlor, I guess you call it. And then there was another club. So let me explain this about Panama as well. Panama, everything's basically legal. I called it New York, Miami, and Las Vegas all wrapped in one little Tootsie Roll. See, the way Panama is you have your inner city, Panama City, and that's the bright lights, big city, and the trendy shit. And then you unpeel the layer of the onion, and now you're in poor Panama, where all the Panamanians really live. And everything else, that's not where, like in any foreign country, that's not where the resorts are, where any of the people the foreigners or the tourists go. This is where just the regular folks live. And then Panama has its outskirts when you get to the coasts. Panama's the only country, I think it's the only country, maybe one of the only countries, we can look this up, that has the Atlantic and Pacific. So you can enjoy both of those. And everybody always had their favorite of which one, whatever. But Panama has incredible surf and incredible fishing and an incredible like jungles. And there's even some primitive people, I feel like, that live in some of these jungles over there. It's just, it's interesting how it's got 3 different worlds. And it's a very small country. It's like a larger version of New Jersey, flipped on its side, kind of. And so Panama... So that gives you an idea of the country. And we were in Panama City next to the Veneto. It was a Wyndham Grand Casino, and it was the spot. And Panama had legal gambling, and it had legal prostitution, and it had and its nightlife was like till 4 a.m, and it was like Miami. So when I say it's all wrapped up in one, it was Miami because of the Latin flair, and then the Spanish. And it was like New York City because it had all these cobblestone streets, and there was no chains. There was no Burger Kings and Walmarts and fucking Claire's and wherever Krispy Kremes and all this other shit that, everything was individualized and really cool and different, kind of like, like what people like about New York. And it was like Vegas because all of your vices. Panamanians consume an incredible amount of beer. Girls and guys. Girls don't get mixed cocktails. You will not find a Panamanian girl drinking Cosmopolitan. ever. They drink Balboa beer, and they'll drink 7 of them. So that's interesting. So at that point, we have this club, and it was called Dollhouse. And Dollhouse was open for 3 months. Now, my buddy, when we first got to Panama, bought 7 properties. Our very first visit, we got high, and when he gets high, he likes to spend money. And at that time, there was a lot of money to spend, I assume. And he bought a whole bunch of properties, pretty much sight unseen, from pamphlets and just like these beautiful, look at the Luxor, and there's nothing to go by then other than looking at it on a paper, on a pamphlet, whatever. And he bought a bunch, and one of those finally got built. And there's a whole story to that as well, because a lot of these buildings don't get built. We started realizing, I think they're laundering money through these buildings. I started to figure it out. I think they're laundering money because nobody lives in any of these fucking buildings. And how do they keep putting these beautiful high-rises up? And we're going to talk about Panama down the road. I have lots of photos and lots of pictures to show of my experiences there. And so it didn't really make sense to us. So he finally, one of the condos was built, and we were living in it. And it was a loft, and he was living in the upstairs. It was his condo. And I lived in a pull-out couch out of my suitcase. And we were hardly home anyways. We were always on the go and working, whatever. And he tells me, listen, my wife and kids are coming to visit, and you're going to have to go back home for 2 weeks, 14 days when they come. And I was like, what? I was like, we're doing work. And I don't think I wanted to leave. I think that I was I was having, everything was going so well there, and so I was kind of kicking and scratching and clawing not to go, but I had to go because there was just no room. There was absolutely no room, and so I fly back to Florida. And I talked to my buddy every day, 14 days. I already had my ticket bought to go back. And on the 8th day of the 14 days, I'm on the phone with him. He was using a Magic Jack, so it was easy to talk every day for free. And VoIP, voice, what is it? Voice over something, Internet Protocol, when that was first coming out. Yeah. So that was really, what a cool invention. So that was really cool. So we had this ability to communicate still. And he says to me, hey, let me call you back. The police are here. Let me call you back. Now, we had dealt with the police before. They're kind of on the take there, and they always have their hand out. And, they want freebies and shit. And so he never calls me back. And one day turns to 2. And I'm calling the Magic Jack, and no one answers. And I know his wife's there, and no one's answering. And 3 days turn to 4. And now I realize this is bad. I talk to this guy every day. He's my best friend. This is not good. So I get on Facebook and I reach out to the some of the girls that we worked with. And they explain to me, but they also show me through articles and some news stuff. Dollhouse got raided. It's got closed down. It's really bad. Everything's falling apart. Everyone's in jail from the 2 clubs. It's really, really, really bad. And I can't even believe it. And then he finally reaches out to me. I get a call. He's scared, and this was a tough guy. And I remember him telling me, we all got arrested. I'm in Ancon prison, and I'm very scared. This is very, very, very bad. So he wound up doing almost 3 years, and I'm not going to go into this at length because there's a lot more to talk about, all the details of this, but through the grace of God, and this has actually it has changed me to a religious person because I didn't grow up with much religion in my life. How's time? Good. Excellent. I was spared. This gentleman sends me home. So if you believe in your heart of hearts that no things happen by accident or there are no coincidences or what have you, this whole bus goes down while I'm in Florida. And it spared my life because if I was there when this all went down, I too would have been locked up. And I firmly believe that I would never have gotten out. You see, my buddy and the Russians and the people that were all affiliated in this in some way had a lot more money than me, and they had a lot more power, and they had a lot more influence. Now, they were never convicted. They spent all this time there. I don't know why that did. I shut that down. They spent all this time there, and they were never convicted. They were waiting on their court date. And I mean, again, I'm going to go into this. So I firmly believe that God was watching over me. And anyone I tell this story to cannot believe, like, wow, that was it. It was that lucky. You were literally sent home, and on the 8th day, the bus goes down. Now, I mentioned my mother had cancer. If I would have been caught up in that, she dies while I'm in there. So I would never have gotten to be with her, say my goodbyes, spend all the time that I did with her when she was passing away slowly. Lung cancer, by the way, 65 years old, 50-year cigarette smoker. Don't smoke cigarettes. Try to avoid them if you can. It's a scam, and it's a losing battle. It's a fucking lie. They lied in front of Congress. You can go and find out. They put ingredients in there to keep you addicted. There's not just tobacco. There's like 80 to 100 whatever fucking additives and all that. Both of my parents were cigarette smokers, so I have such a negative opinion. Marlboro Reds my whole life, and kids saying like, "Yeah, you stink, you stink." Of course I fucking stink. I got 2 cigarette smokers in the house. Or thinking that I smoked at 7 years old because I smelled like a Marlboro factory. So she passed away from her cigarette smoking, I would assume. Lung cancer, 50 years smoking. So I would not have been able to be with her and experience and say goodbye. So, I mean, truly, truly blessed by God. I do firmly believe that. And while I was born Jewish, I think, as I said, I came up with this really cool catchphrase, I guess. And so basically what this podcast is. So before I even say that, actually, just to bring us totally current up to date, how do we get to this podcast? Because I'm probably sidetracking there. I wound up getting into, well, everything was over now. My buddy's in prison, and I'm out of the strip club business now. So now what? And I took a job driving a taxi in Cocoa Beach. Well, I thought, what am I really going to do? So let me just get a quick side hustle, make some cash, and figure some things out. And that's what I did. And it was pretty fun. And I met some colorful people and did that. This is all pre-Uber, pre-Lyft, by the way. Those did not exist. And but that owner was making a lot of money sending cars out on the road. We were paying him a rental for the car. It wasn't a revenue split. We had to just pay for rights to the car. But this guy, who I feel is an asshole, would put all 6 cars out on the road on a Tuesday day the same way he would on a Friday night. Well, we're not nearly as fucking busy. Why would you do that? We're not going to make the same money. The drivers are going to struggle because you put them all out on the road. But he didn't care. He got his cash. So I left him, went to another outfit in another city, more nearby for me. And that guy was very nice. And he taught me more about the industry. And so I wound up starting my own transportation company, a driving business. It's Executive Limo and Taxi, and I am still in operation. So if you need rides to the airport with a little touch of class, clean car, good prices, cash or credit, I'd love to be able to service you. Executive Limo and Taxi, where you always ride in first class. So I did that, and I've been doing that, and I also do some blogging and writing and web development and SEO for a company that I took a year off, and we'll get into that another time. My dependable website management.com, and they're out of Boynton Beach, South Florida. Great outfit, great people, and so I do work for that too. So so that's what I've been doing. Fast forward to now, where we're at right now. That's where my life is at, and there's some big things on the horizon with the Porky's Panama story. I feel like I had a fallout with my buddy as all of this is drawing closer to a possible movie, a possible series like a Sopranos, Locked Up Abroad. He's going to be on. I can tell you now, it's all coming. We've been sitting on this for 5 or 6 years, but we knew this story. The stories and all the anecdotes and everything we've lived through, we knew this was a winner. It was just a matter of who's going to help us get there. Look at all these reality shows where, who really wants to watch people in the fucking woods, sitting on a log like they do? I can't even believe how many stupid shows there are, what people do watch. when there's some, and this is some genuinely really entertaining and funny and just bizarre stories. And people like sex and strip clubs and drugs and whatever, and Miami and Russians, and it's all the shit you could want, whatever. So we always thought this was a big thing, and it is coming soon enough. But I think he's trying to cut me out. We'll get into that. He is cutting me out. I don't even think it. I actually know. We had a major fallout. My best friend, what a letdown. Of all the letdowns and all the things I've been through in my life, and there certainly are many, having a close friend cut you out once like money's starting to get real and things are starting to come, when you held his hand every fucking day, where it affected your marriage, it affected your I'm now divorced, and the girlfriend I had after affected everything, because me and this guy were like this. And it truly was, jump. When he said jump, I said how high. And I truly put him first, probably in the wrong way in a lot of my life. But that being said, so here we are. Why am I doing this podcast? The Mr. Josh podcast. I am Mr. Josh, MisterJoshW, the Mr. Josh podcast, TMJP.com. Basically, why am I doing this? Because I have a lot to say. Because I'm an opinionated, ranting, sarcastic Jewish asshole, but I'm also super sweet. I hold doors for old ladies. I slow down in the Publix parking lot when people are coming out so they can walk out and not even think that I'm going to drive into them. I go and get the tennis ball when the kid loses his tennis ball. I go and get it, and you know what I mean. And when the dog comes up, I pet the dog. I put my hand out and acknowledge the dog or whatever. So I think those are some pretty sweet things that a nice person does. But I've also been accused of being an asshole because of my opinions and the way I think. And you're going to see what those things are over time on this podcast. I've interviewed some famous folks, so I plan on doing interviews in this format as well. I've interviewed Sid Rosenberg, who is a shock jock sports disc jockey who's pretty well known. DJ Irie, he is the Miami Heat's. He's the Miami Heat DJ at the games, but he's also a major Miami nightclub DJ for years. And bike builder Eddie Trotta, and the custom bikes, those big $30,000 really cool, hand painted fucking pieces of art, all chromed out and whatnot. And I did an interview with him, and also Dirt Nasty, one of my favorites, Simon Rex. Dirt Nasty. No one really knows, is this a gimmick? Is this real? Whatever. It's still funny as shit. And if you know who he is, he's tied in with Mickey Avalon and Nick Swardson and Beardo and Andre Legacy and all these guys, whatever. Really cool scene, LA scene, whatever. And so I did a great interview with him, and also with Gorilla Tech, who was a major, not as probably relevant now, but a major hip-hop producer back in the day. And really cool guy. So I've done some interviews, and then some interviews also with some not as big celebrities, but just some heartwarming stuff, some good stuff and whatnot. And I'll go over that because I did that all while I was with the South Florida Chronicle. And again, this is stuff we're going to talk about. So I'm here because I wanted to do this, because I have strong opinions, and I'm watching these YouTube celebrities, and I'm watching people do where they're reading news on YouTube, or they're giving their critique of what's going on in the news and going through stories and all that. And I feel like I could do that better. I could explain that better. I would rebut you better, or I share in your opinion, but why aren't you expanding on this, that, and the other, or anything like that? So I felt it was time. And I come across Jesse and Space Coast podcast, and I realized, wow, there's a studio, much like a recording studio, where every wannabe rapper goes and thinks that they're going to be the next Drake. So you have all these recording studios for music, but you never see podcast recording studios. And it was almost like God sent it to me or something, because I didn't even know this existed, and I didn't seek it out. I found it by accident. I think I found it on Instagram. I'm not sure even how it popped up or why, but and that's not even important. So we wound up meeting, and I liked everything I saw and how it was going. So we pushed forward, we plod forward. And so this is where we're at currently. I am giving this a go. I am going to be doing this, hopefully, and we're going to get this planned out, doing this once a week, and if not more. And I'll be doing things on YouTube, and I'll be doing things at the podcast studio, and I plan on doing some man-on-the-street stuff. I plan on speaking with just regular folks and just popping a camera right in their face and saying, who are you, and tell us something interesting about you. and just so we could just see what they have to say. They may tell me to go fuck off. They may slap me in the face, or they may have a really interesting story, and you're like, wow, that's amazing, just right there, boom, like that. I like talking to homeless people. I used to go to homeless people and give them money or give them food because my curiosity was, how did you get here? Because that could have been me if my scenarios were just a little bit different, because that's how life really is, folks. You have to understand, life is a series of crossroads. And it's like those old books when you would read when you were a kid, like turn to page 43 for this to happen and turn to page 27 for this to happen. I don't know if they still do that or whatever, but when we were kids, that was a really cool kind of thing, whatever. And it was always a different adventure based on where you went in the book. And that's really how life is. And for me, it could have easily gone in many different directions as you make decisions in life and the forks in life and the things that you have to do. And one thing I try to teach my daughter this. I have a 21-year daughter. Oh my God, how did you leave that out? Yes, I have a daughter. I think I mentioned it. I have a daughter now. She's 21 years old, but we'll keep that a little more private. We'll talk about her down the road as well. But I remember teaching her when she was much younger, and I says, because I know how it affected me. I says, there's two ways you can go about life. So one of the things you're going to get from this podcast as well is I hope some proverbs and some real jewels and wisdom and things for your mind, because that's what I'm really hoping to do here, is that smart people like to listen to other smart people. And one of the things I told her was there's two ways life's going to go for you. You can dictate your life, or life's going to dictate you. And when I had a baby on the way at 22 years old, where I was not planning this, life was dictating it for me. I wasn't dictating my life. And it shouldn't go that way. You want to be able to make as many choices you can and do the things that you want to do on your terms. But if you're not serious about what you're doing, or organized, or doing the proper things you need to do, then you're not going to make the decisions for life. Life's going to make that decision for you. For instance, when you have to take a job because you have to do this, I have to pay for this. Well, life is now deciding shit for you. You're not deciding shit for your own life. And you want to change that. And we'll talk about that. Long story short, what is this podcast going to be about? Well, you're going to hear my rants and raves about politics, current events, social media, SJWs, one of my favorite subjects, sports, cryptocurrency, which I'm big on, sex, which we all love to talk about, 420 and CBD culture, the whole marijuana CBD thing and how that's the attitudes are changing. And I plan on doing interviews as well, maybe a couple of panels, and we're going to do some game show stuff. I'm going to find a way to get people in here and have fun. We'll come up with some cool stuff and give away some prizes or cash or whatever, and because people love that shit. Again, this is the Mr. Josh W podcast that you're listening to. We are live from the Space Coast Podcast Studios in sunny South Florida, and just keep in mind all the socials. I am on Instagram, I am on Twitter, and I am on YouTube, and all of this will be expanding. It's all under MisterJoshW, MisterJoshW. Josh W. Spell it out just like that. Throw it in Google. All that shit will come up. And I look forward to engaging with you folks, and I think we're going to have a good time. And, the crazier, the better. And I hope that we have audiences that will engage, and I'm going to do everything I can to engage with you. I care about what you think. I care about what you think about me. I care about what you think about what's going on in this crazy world. And we're going to have a good time, but it's going to be provocative, and it's going to be interesting. And I have so much more to get into, so many fucking stories, so many different crazy things. And we're just going to let loose, man. So like I said, this is, again, the Mr. Josh W podcast signing off.